Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Loney. I had a text from one of my comrades that told me that it was time to go live, so we're going to do that. We've got Iker Khalid in this disgusting debate right now.
For Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops Thompson Caribou. I listened to part of my colleague's speech here, and she was referencing protecting children. This is a government, and I asked my colleague this is a government that has eliminated mandatory minimums when it comes to, or has not addressed mandatory minimums when it comes to sexual offences. The Harper government addressed mandatory minimums on drugs, they addressed them on guns, and on sexual offences. They've legislated on guns, they've legislated on drugs, they have not touched sexual offences. And my colleague from St. Catharines can complain all he wants about this. At the end of the day, the reality is that you have people who are committing sexual offences against children and serving it on house arrest. I will also note that he did not vote to have Paul Bernardo's transfer revisited. I wonder how the people of St. Catharines feel about that. Now, how can this member say that they are there for protecting children when the reality is they are allowing predators to serve their sentences at home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will take no lessons about the protection of Canadians from that party that continues.
Order. I'm seeing a lot of cross conversation going on. The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
I just want to say it's disgusting in this place that the Honourable Member across the way with a smile on his face would mention a serial killer in this name to attempt to use it for political gain.
Absolutely.
I have the floor. That wasn't a... Order. For Mississauga and Mills. Hey,
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will be the reasonable voice in the House today. And unfortunately, you know, when I hear colleagues, accusing each other of righteous indignation, you know, we have to look at our track records. There's a lot that we have done as a Liberal government to protect children, and there's a lot of slogans that have come out from that side. There's a lot of politicization of what should be the protection of children here in our country that we are not able to get to because they continue to restrict and to uphold and to completely restrict a legislation like this going forward through this House so that it can protect Canadians and can protect our children all across the country.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today I'm going to speak about one of the Online Harm Act's core purposes, and that's the protection of children. Our government will stop at nothing to ensure kids in this country are safe, and this includes online safety. Our children spend many hours of their day watching online videos, chatting with their friends, and posting snippets of their life. Being online is integral to their lives and offers many benefits. It's a way for them to connect, learn, and be entertained. However, the online space is not always safe for children. We have rigorous toy standards to ensure that Canadian kids don't get hurt while playing. The Internet is the most complex and riskiest toy ever invented. It must have its own safety standards to protect kids from the harms embedded within social media platforms. For too long, we've tolerated a system where social media platforms have offloaded their responsibilities onto parents, expecting them to protect their kids from harms that platforms create and amplify. Until now, there have been no safety regulations for online platforms. Parents and kids don't know where to turn to get help when things go wrong online. This bill creates a baseline standard for online platforms to keep Canadians safe. It holds platforms accountable for the content they host. Over the last several years, we've conducted extensive public consultations. A common theme that was heard was the vulnerability of children online and the pressing need to take steps to protect them. At the same time, the consultations highlighted a desire for a flexible, risk-based approach to online regulation. Bill 63 balances these two objectives. I'm disappointed to see the Conservatives discredit the hard work of organizers, victims, and survivors across the country who were consulted on this legislation. By refusing to support this bill, they're rejecting this experience and the reality of today's world, that children are not currently safe online. This bill was meticulously created to keep Canadians safe while ensuring rights are maintained. The Online Harms Act introduces a new duty to protect children that requires platforms to integrate design features that protect children on their platforms and report on the measures they're taking to protect children. The specific design features will be identified following open regulatory processes where all interested parties will have a chance to be heard. This will ensure that the measures are fit for purpose, consider the latest research and evidence, and are workable for the social media services that will need to implement them. We believe this approach to protecting children respects this government's position of supporting a safe and inclusive digital space in Canada. The Online Harm Act requires operators of social media services to integrate design features that protect children, such as age-appropriate design. Bill C-63 does not opt for a prescriptive approach requiring the use of a specific technology, such as age verification, but instead opts for a principle-based approach that can evolve with technology. The goal of age-appropriate design is to make the user experience for children online safer by decreasing the risk that they will encounter harmful content. This might include design features like parental controls, default settings related to warning labels on content, and safe search settings. Age-appropriate design is useful because it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It recognizes that a 5-year-old and a 16-year-old interact with the online world differently, so they likely require different design features to improve the safety of their online experience. The Digital Safety Commission will articulate these features through regulations after examining industry practices and available technology, as well as engaging with stakeholders and Canadians. This process will ensure that the subsequent regulations on design features that protect children will be well informed and in line with Canadians' expectations of privacy and digital expression. Bill C-63 was crafted with special attention to freedom of speech, as this is a charter right that the government will always protect. At each step, we made design choices with freedom of expression top of mind. Under the Online Harms Act, the risk-based approach is anchored in a duty to act responsibly that requires platforms to create safer spaces online where users are less likely to encounter harmful content. The duty seeks to ensure that adequate systems are in place by services that limit the likelihood of users viewing harmful content. Bill C-63 would also enhance the protection of children online by amending an act respecting the mandatory reporting of Internet child pornography by persons who provide an Internet service, the quote, Mandatory Reporting Act. The bill would amend the Mandatory Reporting Act to strengthen reporting obligations under the Act to help facilitate child pornography investigations. The bill would allow for the centralization of reporting to a single law enforcement body, a response to a long-time ask from law enforcement and child advocates. The duty to report would be triggered when the service provider has reasonable grounds to believe that their network is being or has been used to commit a child pornography offense. The reporting requirement will also be enhanced to require the provision of transmission data in any report where the service provider believes that the material is manifestly child pornography. We recognize that children are spending more and more of their time on the Internet. Our goal is not to prevent children from having access to valuable information and the social experience online. Our goal is the opposite, to make the online environment as safe as possible for them to explore. The duties set out in the Online Harms Act will be critical to accomplishing this goal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Pointe-de-l'Île.
The Honourable Member for Pointe-de-l'Île. Thank you. I congratulate my colleague on her speech. would she agree that we should divide the bill up into parts? So then we could deal with part 1, which mostly relates to sexual content, and we could divide that from other parts of the bill, which may be problematic for some.
Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question and for his suggestion. I think the government spent 4 years consulting on this bill, and I think it's important that we look at the entire bill together. I know it's going to be going to committee, and honourable members can discuss those kind of things there, but given 4 years of consultation, I believe the government has listened to the consultation and put what it needs to put into this bill.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague for a great speech, and I've enjoyed working with her on so many different issues over the years. She talked about the protection of children. Now, the U.S. Senate recently passed the Kids Online Safety Act with bipartisan support, and that'd be great to be able to do something like that here on parts of this. But it contained provisions to restrict design features that contribute to compulsive use of social media by youth, like automatic playing of media, rewards for time spent on the platform, and notifications. Now, by contrast, Bill C-63 primarily focuses on addressing harmful content and leaves the possibility of restricting addictive design features to future regulations. Now, given the youth mental health crisis and increasing concerns about the role of social media, does my colleague believe that Bill C-63 could be improved by incorporating provisions like those seen in the U.S. bill to restrict addictive design features?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his tremendous work when it comes to mental health and the mental health of young people here in Canada. We did a study at the Ethics Committee, one of the few studies that we actually were able to do some work on the influence of exactly the type of addictive behavior that the honourable member has spoken about and the impact on young people. And it's not as easy as I initially thought it would be to regulate that. I think it's something that's important that we look at, the addictive nature of social media and the algorithms that are built in are something that we do need to be looking at, and I would be happy to work with the honourable member on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much. And with respect to the important concerns pointed out by the member from the NDP, I think those are really important suggestions to get on the floor of the committee. With respect to the ideas about dividing the bill, I think what's really important is that after 4 years of consultation, we understand online harms to be a continuum. They don't just affect children, they affect adolescents, and they affect people who are adults. What I would put to the member opposite, and I've appreciated her work tremendously as well, she's been an outspoken advocate for women, including women who are facing violence and things like coercive control. A very key measure in this bill deals with not just older adult women, but also younger women. And that deals with the phenomenon of revenge porn, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. We know that that has had tragic consequences for young Canadian women in this country, such as Rehtaeh Parsons and Amanda Todd. Under this bill, under Bill C-63, that kind of material would have to come down within 24 hours. Could the member comment as to whether that will help keep Canadian young women and adult women safe?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister of Justice for that question, because I've heard testimony from the families of both Amanda Todd and Rehtaeh Parsons when I was on the Status of Women Committee. And those young women continue to be victimized online because their images continue to circulate. How many years ago were these young women just horrifically victimized online, forcing both of them to die by suicide? And I think it's incredibly important that these types of images do get removed from the internet immediately, so that the victims, and in some cases their families, do not continue to be victimized years and years after they were posted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is always an honour to rise on behalf of the people of Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry, and our part of Eastern Ontario. In this case, to contribute to the debate.
Seeing a lot of new faces, I want to say welcome to everybody. We've got a great community here that's growing, people that are interested in watching Canadian federal politics, and learning. This is where it actually happens. Anyhow, welcome to everybody that's hanging out. What a great crew.
Going on today on C-63, the short form known to many Canadians or through the media, and the debate on this is the online harms bill before us here today. I want to take the time that I have today to lay out a case to Canadians that I think is getting clearer and clearer by the month in the year. That after 9 years of the NDP and Liberals in office, crime is up significantly in this country. It is their record, it is their actions, in some cases inactions, but many times the actions they've undone that were successful in keeping our streets safe. When we looked at the metrics by Stats Canada before the Liberals came into office, crime was being decreased across the country. But after 9 years of their legislation and their bills and their ideas and their policy proposals, here is what Stats Canada says is the record of this Prime Minister, the NDP and Liberals working together. Violent crime has increased 50% in this country. Homicides are not down, they are up, and they are up 28%. Sexual assaults are up by 75%. Gang murders have nearly doubled in this country over the course of the last 9 years. And it has unleashed a crime wave across this country. I make the case, sadly now, there is not one part of this country, a province or a region, that has not seen the stories in local media, word of mouth in communities of crime going up. Violent crime, robberies, theft, car theft, you name it. Auto theft is up 46%. The Justice Minister's own car, in fact, has been stolen 3 times. That's how bad crime has gotten under their watch. Extortion has exploded in this country under their watch, up 357%. It was this side of the aisle, through our deputy leader from Edmonton, the member from Edmonton Mill Woods, that had a private member's bill that would crack down and toughen up on those that Canadians who try to extort others. I would suggest when we see numbers of 357% increase, Mr. Speaker, the status quo of whatever they're doing is not working. We proposed a common sense private member's bill from this side of the aisle that was voted down to continue the status quo by the Liberals and NDP. Recently, it was through our work and asking the questions, we finally got some answers. The Liberal government was forced to admit that 256 people were killed in 2022 by a criminal who was out on bail or another form of release. Just in 2022 alone. Unacceptable, and speaks to the many broken policies that they've implemented in the last 9 years. It's not by accident. Look at the province of Ontario that paints the picture of where we go when it comes to their public safety record. In Ontario, the total number of violent criminal code violations is up. It's up 51% in Ontario specifically to 164,723. Homicides in Ontario are up 50%, 262. Total violent firearms offences, for all their record they've claimed to do, and I'll get to that in a bit, 1,346. That is a 97% increase in violent firearms offences in Ontario alone. Extortion is up 383% in Ontario, just under 4,000 cases. And theft of a motor vehicle has gone from, under their watch, when they came in, 16,600 vehicle thefts in Ontario, has exploded 167%, and now under their watch, their soft on crime approach, C5, C75, and so forth, 44,459 thefts of a motor vehicle, a 167% increase. That is their record. C75 is their record, passed and implemented by the Liberals and the NDP, that implemented catch and release bail policies. And despite their attempt of legislation demanded by Conservatives, demanded by every premier in this country, it did not go far enough, and C-75 is still wreaking havoc on our law enforcement and public safety in this country. C-5, passed again by the Liberals and the NDP, supported by the Bloc. In that case, I specifically remember as well. When it started getting implemented and Canadians started to see the wacko examples of criminals of a violent nature, of a repeat nature, being arrested and back out on the streets, the Bloc tried to pretend that they weren't for it anymore, but they voted for C-5. And that removed, in the case of sentencing, mandatory minimum sentences for major crimes, ensuring again that violent criminals are out in the streets. And yet, after all those numbers, Mr. Speaker, and I take the time to lay those out, that is their record. They can't go back and blame anybody else, but for the last 9 years, they have been in office. It has been their government legislation that has allowed this crime wave to be unleashed across Canada. And here we have a Justice Minister that is touting how great their latest solution is with C-63. Rightfully, Canadians have a major distrust in this government. Their record on public safety itself speaks for itself, the numbers and the examples that people are living and breathing. But it was this Justice Minister on his first days on the job did a media interview and said, quote, "I think that empirically it's unlikely Canada's becoming less." People, it's just people's minds. It's in their heads. It's not really a problem. People are just envisioning that. That just goes to show you the mindset and perspective when it comes to public safety, protecting our streets, of getting this violent crime wave down in this country. That's the perspective. It's just all in your heads, and there's nothing to think about. If we look at legislation, I've mentioned C-5 and C-75. It was just last week that this debate is actually timely today, because it was about last week that we got an updated answer. 4 years ago, the Prime Minister had a big stunt of a photo op and an announcement that he was going to ban assault rifles and he was going to clamp down and resolve all of this by their legislation and their will. Well, the numbers are out. 4 years later after saying that, zero firearms are off our streets from criminals. And Mr. Speaker, the only winner in this is the bureaucracy. $67 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on a program that is not even running, not even active, and has taken precisely zero firearms from criminals and gang members off our streets in this country. That is their record. But worst of all with that, we know what they're proposing to do, and why there are all those delays is they are rightfully being called out. That it won't be the gang members, it won't be those involved in criminal enterprises that are doing these car thefts and these violent crimes and committing these firearms offenses in big cities and suburbs and rural communities alike. They're not going to be participating in this terrible program, this costly, useless program, frankly. They are targeting law-abiding firearms owners, hunters, sport shooters, Indigenous communities that follow the law, have never been a public safety issue. It is them that are going to be paying the price on this, and it's taxpayers, just $67 million alone going out. Mr. Speaker, one of the things I've said to many folks in our part of Eastern Ontario and in my travels across the country, there's not too many prerequisites to becoming a member of Parliament and sitting in this chamber. It's democratically elected through democracy, which is obviously the right way to go. But I feel if there ever was a little asterisk that every member of Parliament must do before debating or voting on public safety legislation such as this, they should do a ride-along with the frontline law enforcement in this country. We are very blessed in Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry to have the OPP, the Cornwall Community Police, and we have a force in Akwesasne, and we also have the RCMP. One of the most rewarding events or annual visits that I make is to those detachments, getting in a vehicle with a frontline law enforcement member and seeing firsthand and on the front lines what they have to go through day in and day out. They are extremely, extremely frustrated after 9 years. A soft on crime approach, a broken justice system, a broken bail system, and a Liberal government that continues to make life easier for those criminals of a repeat violent nature and taking valuable police resources and time away from important things in this country, and instead they are repeatedly arresting and rearresting many of the same folks despite being out on bail. I raise that today, Mr. Speaker, because in the context of C-63, under their watch and the broken bail system, where repeat violent offenders are back out in the streets within about 24 hours on average. What is happening is police are being redirected and dealing with the same percentage. It was the Vancouver Police Department that said in 1 year there were 6,000 police interactions, many of those arrests of the same 40, 50 people. That means every other day an interaction, an arrest, a bail hearing, and back out on the street. That is a waste of police resources. How much longer does it take? How many more calls from Conservatives, premiers, law enforcement agencies to fix our broken bail system? And instead what we have here today for Canadians, as when you talk about the broad terms of protecting folks online, protecting children, cracking down, as it says, on internet child pornography, the basis of this legislation is admitting failure on the part of this government, because our court system and existing law enforcement resources are so overloaded with the increase in crime, broken justice system, broken bail system, that now they're proposing a brand new federal bureaucracy, hundreds and hundreds of federal bureaucrats to now administer what they say can't be done through existing means. If we were able to go back to common sense, the way it was before this Prime Minister and the government came into office, we could revert back and allow law enforcement, many cases are existing laws, to be enforced and protect Canadians, to protect children, protect children, families, victims of child pornography, victims of all ages, and to clamp down on the rising hate crime numbers that are happening under their watch. I say this, Mr. Speaker, and I correlate again to their record. We had a piece of legislation a couple of years ago passed under their watch, C-11, which was amending the Broadcasting Act, which was basically, I call a censorship act, where they were going to be hiring hundreds of new bureaucrats at the CRTC to watch and regulate the algorithms of internet searches in Canada. And at that time, oh, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal, it's not going to cost that much. It is getting very, very expensive, and they're just getting started in the cost in the bureaucracy. So I'm proud of our common sense Conservative team on this side, because what we did very early on, when the government came forward with Bill C-63, we asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer to take a look at what the cost of this proposal is going to be. An independent look to understand the true cost to administer what their proposal is. And it was just a little while ago.
All right, gang, not to try to steal from that, but I had a whole other show lined up that this was more interesting when Khalid was on the floor, because she's a fool. And anyhow, I've got a couple of videos that I want us to watch. They're super interesting. Just a couple of minutes with our guy, Andrew Scheer. He's so funny. So we're going to get right into that.
You can say a lot of things about Justin Trudeau, and believe me, I have.
Mr. Trudeau, you are a phony, and you are a fraud, and you do not deserve to govern this country.
you wouldn't really say he's very good with words, would you?
The fact is, we work sorry, let me just try to...
Sorry, gang. Screwed that one up. Here we go, though. We've got it fixed up. So this is our guy, Andrew Scheer. He's an MP from Saskatchewan. Super interesting, entertaining, has like evil eyes, looks like Chucky from the horror movies. Anyhow, check out his channel. He does.
You can say a lot of things about Justin Trudeau, and believe me,
over and over
I have.
Mr. Trudeau, you are a phony, and you are a fraud, and you do not deserve to govern this country.
But you wouldn't really say he's very good with words, would you?
The fact is, we work sorry, let me just try to reorder the thoughts.
And look, it's clear he's never going to be mentioned in the same breath as Winston Churchill, JFK, John Diefenbaker.
We choose to go to the moon. We shall fight in the field. We shall never surrender.
Water bottles out of when we have water bottles out of a plastic.
But in some ways, he's actually incredibly brilliant with words and language. As much as it hurts sometimes to pay the guy a compliment, I have to acknowledge that what he has done with the English language to hide the terrible policies that he's imposing on Canadians on some level is actually kind of genius. Let's go through just a few examples of how Justin Trudeau tries to hide terrible policies behind fancy language.
Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
Throughout her life,
the dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is
how much
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How much? You don't know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million. Really?
While Justin Trudeau might be particularly good at it, this is not unique to him. The left does this all the time, whether it's outright lies or doublespeak or manipulating language and changing meanings of words, titles and phrases to hide the true meanings of their policy. You can find examples of this all the way back in the Soviet Union when the commissars would tell people that all the restrictions on their freedom was to keep them safe. Or like in North Korea, where literally people are told that every good thing in their life comes from the great leader. Of course, Justin Trudeau has to use this because the results of his policies are so catastrophic that if he was honest about what he was doing, people wouldn't stand for it. One of the most outrageous examples of Justin Trudeau using this tactic is on criminal justice, because there's a whole host of terms that the left has to hide the true nature of what they believe in from common sense people. Like conditional sentencing. Conditional sentencing just means house arrest. It just means instead of going to jail, someone who's committed a violent assault or stolen something get to spend their sentence in the luxury of their own home. Community-based sentencing is another one of these terms. Non-custodial sentencing. The principle of least restraint. That's the one that actually directs correctional officials to move dangerous criminals into lower security prisons. It's also the reason why one killer in British Columbia was able to just simply walk away from the facility that he was in because he wasn't in a maximum security prison.
A man accused of killing a Vancouver Island man in his home after walking away from a minimum security prison could soon learn his fate.
If Justin Trudeau was honest, if he really believed that Canadians supported his radical, wacko approach to criminal justice, why didn't he just stand in front of a podium? Can you imagine Justin Trudeau saying this? Can you imagine Justin Trudeau saying, from now on, dangerous and repeat offenders will be released back on the streets so they can re-offend? Of course you wouldn't vote for that. Nobody would. So that's why he hides it behind this made-up phrase, this principle of restraint. It's not obvious what that means. You have to be involved in the legal profession to even know what he's talking about. So he puts this barrier between you, the voter, and the policy that he's enacting to hide the true consequences of what he's going to do to our country.
One man in Victoria is keeping police very busy this week. He's been arrested 3 days in a row in connection to a carjacking, attempted vehicle thefts, and a home invasion.
Trudeau's new policy also includes includes major changes to Canada's bail system. Under the new rules, dangerous and repeat offenders are often let right back out onto the street the very same day they're arrested. This is the reason why crime is spiking all across the country. It's not complicated. When Justin Trudeau started letting dangerous and repeat offenders back out on the street on the very day they were arrested in the first place, what happened? Crime exploded. That's why there's chaos in our streets in almost every community from coast to coast. Probably the best example of Justin Trudeau using a term that means the exact opposite of what his policy is all about is his drug policy. You see, if Justin Trudeau were to have run in the last election promising to make hard drugs like crack, meth, and heroin legal to use in public spaces like bus stops and hospitals, most Canadians would have absolutely rejected it. So he didn't say that's what he was going to do. Instead, he started talking about quote-unquote safe supply. Now, what safe supply actually means is taxpayer-funded hard drugs being given away, maintaining people on their addictions. In British Columbia, he partnered with the province and decriminalized the use of hard drugs in public places. What does that mean? It means it was now legal to consume these dangerous drugs like meth, heroin, and crack in public places around other people. Justin Trudeau uses this kind of language because he wants you to believe that this policy will lead to fewer overdose deaths, less drugs being consumed in our society. In reality, the exact opposite has happened. Even so far as nurses working in hospitals where these dangerous drugs are being consumed in the waiting rooms and ER wards are being advised not to breastfeed their babies. And police forces reporting that they're finding government paid for narcotics being found when they seize massive supplies of drugs when they bust up some of these drug dealers.
London police are speaking out about the diversion of drugs happening in this community.
Diverted safe supply is being resold into our community. It's being trafficked into other communities, and it is being used as currency in exchange for fentanyl, fueling the drug trade.
Police revealed data today that indicated the number of safe supply prescription tablets seized has significantly increased in the last 5 years.
If Justin Trudeau stood in front of a podium and was actually honest with Canadians and said that he was going to make it legal for drug users to consume their dangerous drugs in front of children, in the presence of nurses and other vulnerable Canadians, if he told Canadians that he was going to use your tax dollars to give away powerful opioids, you might not support it. So he dresses it up with all this fancy language to hide the true nature of what he's doing. There is nothing safe about heroin, crack, and meth. There is nothing safe about Justin Trudeau's drug policies.
Working with a jurisdiction that wanted to do it was priority for us. And of course, we've already heard cities like Toronto and Edmonton interested in taking this on as well.
Period. Why do they do this? Why does it seem like every big government political party across the globe uses these tactics so much? Well, Justin Trudeau might be particularly good at it. It's nothing new. It's what big government anti-freedom political parties use as a tactic the whole world over throughout history, primarily by communist countries who deliberately lie about their policy or their project or a new restriction on someone's freedom. For example, the Berlin Wall. We all know it as the wall that prevented people suffering under communism from escaping into the wonderful society of free market capitalism and democracy in West Berlin. But that's not what the communists called it. They told the people of East Berlin that this was a wall that would protect them. This was called the anti-fascist wall. It was sold to the people of East Berlin as a way to prevent an enemy from coming inside the walls. The term they applied for it was the exact opposite of what it actually was. It was sold to the people of East Berlin as a way to keep enemies out, when in reality, it kept the people in. Or we could look at the Great Leap Forward. There's nothing great about it. It was a horrific experience that the government imposed on the people that led to tens of millions of people literally starving to death. A greater number than the total dead in world wars. The This is a classic tactic of the left to change the nature of the terminology so it sounds less negative and more positive. But it is completely dishonest. You will hear this from practically every Marxist-inspired big government promoter politician in any country around the world. It goes a little something like this. We're just asking some people to pay a little bit more.
While we're asking the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little bit more.
We could ask every Canadian to pay their fair share.
And we just saw this recently in Canada where Justin Trudeau claimed that only the wealthy would be asked to pay a little bit more. Now that has been completely debunked. Experts across the board have demonstrated how middle-class Canadians will be paying more under this new tax hike. The mechanic who owns his own business, the farmer, the entrepreneur will all pay more thanks to Justin Trudeau's tax hikes. But let's look at that line. Asking to pay a little bit more. Are they really asking? If I ask my neighbor if I can have his lawnmower, he can always say no. But when the government sets a tax, there's no choice, because the actions of the government are all backed up by that fundamental principle, the thing that separates government from every other institution in our life, is the monopoly on force. That means that at the end of the day, whether it's a parking ticket, a tax hike, or a rule or regulation, at some point, if you don't comply, the government will send somebody with a gun and force you to do it or put you in jail for refusing. So nobody's asking anybody. But again, there's this flowery, warm language, like we're just asking some people to pay a little bit more. This sounds so reasonable, right? Like you could imagine yourself at a family gathering and you say, we're just asking some people to chip in a little bit more for supper, or you're involved in a volunteer organization and we're asking some people to stay a little bit late to help clean up. That's not what's happening. Justin Trudeau is asking no one. He's telling you, he's forcing so many Canadians who have worked so hard to build a business, to hire some people in their community, or to put money away into savings, to fork over more of it so that he can spend it. So all of this, all these fancy terms and double speak and invented language, it all is done for a very specific reason: to confuse the people, to distract and to hide the true nature of their policies so that the people don't outright reject it. And that's why we have to stay ever vigilant with Trudeau, because he's so good at it. It's one of the few things he's actually good at. When politicians ask for your vote, they're offering you a deal. You vote for them, and in exchange, you get the policies that they have promised. And that's why we use common sense terms, easy to understand language, like axing the tax. We are going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're going to stop the crime. We're going to take dangerous criminals who have shown that they will reoffend and keep them away from innocent Canadians for longer periods of time. And we're going to build the homes. We're going to incentivize local communities to unlock the power of the free market and take away the barriers, fire the gatekeepers so that builders can build. We're using common sense terms for our common sense policies. It's time for a common sense government. Two weeks ago, Jagmeet Singh pretended to rip up the agreement with the Liberals. He said that the deal was over. So we asked him, does that mean you would actually vote non-confidence and give Canadians a carbon tax election so they can choose what kind of Canada they want? Well, today we found out the answer was no. It was all an act. It was a big show.
You say this yesterday. Why didn't you say this yesterday?
We're letting you know today.
Why didn't you say it yesterday? You had more than 24 hours. Why did you wait for the Bloc to say this first? Other than to maybe give yourself some political cover, why didn't you say it yesterday?
We're letting you know today.
He said that he's going to keep Justin Trudeau in power so he can keep hiking your carbon tax, keep letting criminals out onto the streets, keep rewarding gatekeepers who block new homes from being built so house prices stay high. And just to show you a perfect example of Jagmeet Singh's complete and utter hypocrisy, is just a few moments after his declaration that he would keep the corrupt Liberals in power, he walked into the House of Commons and voted to declare that Canada is in a housing crisis. Every single member of Parliament just voted to declare that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government has caused a housing crisis. And yet they are going to keep the Liberal Party in power. This just makes no sense. while other political parties like the Bloc and the NDP take turns keeping the Liberal government in power, Conservatives will stay focused on making life better for you. We're going to axe the tax so prices can come down. We're going to fix the budget so inflation and interest rates come down. We're going to stop the crime by putting dangerous and repeat offenders back behind bars instead of letting them out on the streets. And we're going to bring down home prices by rewarding municipalities that build, build, build. That is Pierre Poilievre's positive vision for this country. Let's bring it home. The internet has given us so many wonderful developments, from being able to look up something with the click of a mouse, watching events as they happen. But I think we can all agree that the greatest contribution to human civilization from the internet has been the meme. One of my favorites is this meme from The Office.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
Now, I've been thinking about this meme ever since I got here because all the buzz, from reporters to Liberal MPs themselves, is that the Liberal Party is actually thinking about swapping the name on the letterhead, changing out the leaders, and bringing in someone like Mark Carbon Tax Carney. Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau are essentially the same person. It's like that meme. There is no difference between the two. Let me explain. First, we have to remember, why is the Liberal Party so unpopular right now? It's not just because of Justin Trudeau. It's not like he's a bad dinner guest or that he ran over your neighbor's dog. He's unpopular because his policies have caused so much hardship. Those policies are the reason why prices have shot up so much over the last few years. Those policies are why the Bank of Canada had to raise your interest rate on your mortgage to fight the inflation that he caused. Liberal policies putting the rights of criminals ahead of the rights of law-abiding Canadians is why there's crime and chaos in our streets in Canada. But let's go back to that idea, the fact that Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney are basically the same person. After all, they're both out-of-touch elites. They both rub shoulders and clink glasses with people on the fancy cocktail circuit. If there's been one person who's been at more WEF conferences than Justin Trudeau, it would be Mark Carney. But most importantly, they share the same worldview. That society should be controlled by a small number of elites making decisions for us, planning our lives, our communities, telling us what to do. This isn't just me launching attacks at Mark Carney. Look at what he has said. He has praised Justin Trudeau's approach to things. He supports the carbon tax. He's cheered on the Trudeau Liberals imposing that on Canadians, and he supports it going up and up every year.
But what you're saying is you oppose pipelines in Canada, but you support them in the UAE and in Brazil. That's what you've actually said.
There are specific.
That's your double standard.
It is not a double standard.
It is a double standard.
No, it's not.
You make billions of dollars off foreign pipelines and you shut them down here at home, putting our people out of work.
Just like Justin Trudeau, he wants to leave Canadian oil and gas in the ground.
Half of gas, 3/4 of coal, etc. Maybe up as much as half of oil reserves, proven reserves, need to stay in the ground if we're going to get to where we are.
But that doesn't stop him from making millions of dollars for him and his wealthy shareholders. You see, he is on the management team at Brookfield. Brookfield invests in a lot of oil and gas projects, just not in Canada, in countries far away. In many cases, countries that don't share our values and are outright hostile to Canada and our allies. This is just like Justin Trudeau when he canceled major energy projects in Canada and even told our trading partners that we couldn't sell them our clean and ethical natural gas. But he found hundreds of millions of dollars of your hard-earned tax money to send to the Asian Infrastructure Bank, a development bank controlled by the regime in Beijing, which is building pipelines in other countries. Same policies that would have the same results for Canada.
Hi, I'm Mark Carney. I moved back to this city 2 years ago because I know that Ottawa is a great place to raise a family.
Mark Carney doesn't just love Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. He loves Justin Trudeau's approach to criminal justice as well. He believes in putting the rights of criminals ahead of the rights of law-abiding Canadians. That's why he supports Trudeau's catch and release bail policies that let dangerous and repeat offenders right back out onto the street, often the very same day that they're arrested. But fundamentally, just like Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney doesn't believe in the power of the free market. He believes in bigger and bigger government that interferes more and more in your life and takes more and more from you off your paycheck. And then the government gets to decide who gets some of it back. The exact same approach that caused all the misery facing Canadians today. But you know what? When we're thinking about out-of-touch elites trying to run the world and make decisions for us, Mark Carney is actually worse than Justin Trudeau. You see, Justin Trudeau was born into the jet-setting, cocktail-clinking class. You might say that Justin Trudeau didn't have much of a choice, that he was destined to be that type of person, being born into a famous, wealthy, liberal family. But you see, Mark Carney had to work to get there. He had to set his sights on a goal and plan out steps as to how he would be accepted into that global elite class. And boy, has he ever succeeded.
Thank you, David, for having me. Evan, Ian, Jerry, the whole Eurasia group.
And that's the last thing Canadians need right now, swapping out one out-of-touch elite just for another. And that's why, over the next few weeks and months, anytime you hear about the Liberals changing leaders, bringing in a high-profile person like Mark Carbon Tax Carney, or picking someone off the bench, maybe out of cabinet, just remember this. All along the way, while Justin Trudeau was imposing his carbon tax and quadrupling it, while he was letting dangerous and repeat offenders out onto the street, as he was flooding our communities with taxpayer-funded hard drugs, keeping people addicted instead of focusing on recovery and treatment, all those Liberals supported Justin Trudeau's policy. Because it's not about who leads the Liberal Party of Canada. It's about what the Liberal Party of Canada stands for. So while the Liberals are busy trying to figure out which leader they can put on the brochure to try to convince you that they've made a major change, just remember, it's only Conservatives that have the solutions to make your life better. We're gonna bring prices and home heating costs down by axing the tax. We're gonna fix the budget so that inflation comes down and interest rates along with it. We're going to make our communities safer again by ending Justin Trudeau's wacko experiment with legalized drugs and putting dangerous and repeat offenders back behind bars to keep you safe. And we're gonna fix the housing crisis by rewarding cities and towns that build homes instead of rewarding those that block new developments. So it's just like that meme. No matter whose picture the Liberals put on that other piece of paper, it will all be Justin Trudeau's policies. And that's also why the only way to get our country back on track is the common sense approach of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. That's how we're going to bring it home.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith last.
All right, guys, sorry to interrupt, but we're going to try to show one more video before question period. We're still 8 or 10 minutes away from question period. We won't miss any of that, but this is another interesting piece. Vassy is probably the only journalist in Canadian major media that I halfway trust. And only halfway, but anyways, sometimes she does good pieces. Let's take a look.
Tonight, sounding off against federal discussions aimed at resettling asylum seekers across the country in an effort to ease the burden on Ontario and Quebec. Smith argues her province doesn't have the capacity to meet federal resettlement numbers, an argument also being made by her counterparts in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Saskatchewan. The feds today did announce changes to another stream of temporary immigration, international student permits. Starting next year, the government will cut the number of permits issued by another 10%. The new target for 2025 and 2026 will be 437,000 permits. In 2024, the target is 485,000 permits. Earlier this year, the feds announced a 2-year cap on international students. To talk more about all of that, joining us live is Immigration Minister Mark Miller. Minister, good to see you again. Thank you very much for making the time.
Nice to see you, Vashi.
I think this is the second time since the beginning of the year that we have talked about a sort of cut to international student, what amounts to a cut to international student permits. I wondered if this is the end of the line or if you anticipate you'll have to make further cuts in the future.
Yeah, and it's not only just to the international student program and putting a cap on it and sort of rationalizing it, making it fair across the provinces, with Ontario and BC having done taken more than their lion's share of international students. We've tried to make this fair. We've tried to make it fair in the optic of the spouses that come in with some of these folks, and with the postgraduate work permits come with them. So it's a bit more of an ecosystem than just cutting students. But we made an announcement, a very important affordability announcement earlier in March, to bring the number of temporary residents down from 7%, which it is now, to 5%. Bank of Canada rightly said there needed to be policies to underpin that. We did a portion of that. We think these measures, as announced, there are about 6 or 7 measures that I announced today, will reach us to that 5%. Now, we will only feel that probably in the second quarter of 2025, but the measures today complement the ones that I announced in January, and we're already seeing the results in some areas where there's lots of students with rents coming down. They are tentative in nature, so we have to kind of wait and see. But we think they make sense. First of all, they restore the integrity of the international student visa system that had admittedly gotten overheated. And they're ones I think we can be quite proud of when they're put into effect and work. And so we'll monitor those things constantly, but these measures today, I think, should be the ones, at least substantively, that we'll be materially announcing in the next little while.
And do you anticipate that you'll have to augment that 5% target at all, or do you think that that is the number that, essentially, for lack of a better term, society can has the capacity to absorb?
Well, we're constantly tracking these things, and the concept of absorptive capacity has been more or less used for political purposes. It's very hard to define. It is the pressure on the healthcare system. Is it the pressure on housing? We know that the impact and volume of immigration, temporary or permanent, has an impact on affordability, but it's been very sort of hard to pin it down, and there's no economist that can actually do that in a quantitative way. It becomes more of a qualitative assessment, but we're working on it. We know that volume needs to come down. We know that the system's gotten overheated, and particularly in the area of international students and the postgraduate work permits that come with it, which compose about half of the temporary residents in Canada, and we need a system that actually makes sense that we can continue to be proud of.
So just to be clear, are you basing your actions on a qualitative assessment or a quantitative one? Because, for example, the Bank of Canada has just written a note this week assessing the quantitative impact of immigration, in particular on the housing sector. Their conclusion, as I read it, was that it did have a tangible impact on the availability of affordable housing, less of a tangible impact, if none at all, on wages and a lot of the things people have been talking about on the temporary worker side, which is something you've also started to address. So are you making the decisions based on numbers or just pushback from, as you would put it, for political purposes?
Well, there's a couple of things going on there. When in the international student visa model, it's a bit of both. Obviously, the volume was too high. That needs to, and we did curtail it. But we also want an international visa student that actually attracts students and not people looking to do other things, looking to get low-wage jobs. It was a question of short-term gain with a lot of long-term pain coming with it, with provinces and the institutions that they regulate not getting or not having a proper assessment of what the long-term needs of the province were, of the institutions in question, and sort of just bagging the quick money and running with it and stranding people in this country that had perhaps been sold a false bill of goods. The range of quality between those institutions, between U of T's, McGill's, UBC's, and sort of the really shady ones is quite great. So making sure that we are asserting our responsibility federally, but making sure provinces who've been told by their auditors general time and time again to get a grip on the regulation of these institutions also do their job. So there's a lot of things in the mix here, but the measures that we instituted today, as well as the ones that we did in January, I think make sense. They're responsive to what Canadians want, and it's the federal government looking at the situation and getting a rein on it.
I know you have a hard out in 2.5 minutes, so I would like to ask you more about that. I want to move on to us. Are you sure? I don't want to get it because I just want to follow. I do want to follow up on the issue of sort of on what you're making your decisions. And in particular, you're talking about the temporary side of things. But when we last spoke, it was at Cabinet and you were entertaining the possibility or broaching the possibility of looking at the permanent stream of immigration as well. Right after that, I interviewed Mike Moffat, who was presenting to you in Cabinet. And I asked him, based on the absorptive capacity in housing specifically, like what that cut would have to look like, because you said it wouldn't be cosmetic, it would be significant if it happens. He said, in order to sort of temporarily over the next few years be able to meet what the supply of housing is, you would have to go from a plan of 500,000 permanent immigrants to 300 or 200 a year, 200,000 a year. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Well, currently we're looking at a number of options, Vashi, and I'm not going to speak out of turn. We still have to have this discussion in Cabinet, but we're looking at a model that would look at reductions. We're looking at models that have other options to them, and it's really a discussion that needs to have a proper discussion at Cabinet. As we look at the impact of immigration, we still have an aging demographic when it comes to our workforce. It's something we have to look at in a generational perspective, but without dismissing the conundrum that's come with that on affordability, on housing, on what Mike Moffat talks a lot about, particularly on social media. Those are important conversations. We also have to weigh what these potential impacts or decisions will have on the economy and the recessionary impact that this could have. And so responsibly, we have to actually look at those numbers. Were we to go back to Stephen Harper numbers, that would be an irresponsible, I think, approach to immigration. It may be one that is weaponized and used by political parties. But quantitatively, we know that the numbers that
or a qualitative assessment?
Well, it's a bit of both, but in terms of the volume itself, quantitatively, we know that the numbers that Stephen Harper had were unsustainable. We needed immigration in order to make the workforce younger. The Bank of Canada has highlighted that. The IMF has highlighted that we've avoided 2 recessions because of it. We also have to look at that quality of the migration that's come and the impact that that's had on different areas, looking at housing affordability, healthcare, the impact on provinces that the provinces highlight. So having that rational conversation without sort of incessantly pointing fingers at people and calling them names, I think is super important, and it actually is reflective of the conversations that we have around the dinner table or whenever we gather with our close ones.
But my questions are based in rationality. Like, I'm not asking on behalf of a political party. I'm asking after having interviewed, people who are looking at the housing market and what has happened and the impact it's had, not just on people who have lived here for a long time, but those very immigrants who are coming here and unable to find a home. And that's why I'm asking if you think it's reasonable. I take from your comments that even for a few years, it would be too drastic of a cut to go back to those levels, in your view, even if it makes housing more sustainable?
We have to, you obviously have to look at the impact that would have in the short term. Housing is one of the considerations. It is a major consideration, but it isn't the only one. There are important steps we have to make the interest rates go down. When the interest rates going down, make housing more affordable. So it's multifaceted in nature. There's no doubt that the volume is having an impact, and we have a responsibility to address it. I'm a little constrained about what I can speak about publicly right now, Vashi. I spoke to a lot of economists about what their views are. They don't necessarily agree all the time with Mike Moffat. They'll agree with whatever the Bank of Canada might not agree with the Bank of Nova Scotia or RBC. They have different views, but we owe it to them to have those conversations with them and actually have an active debate with them as we take into all the other considerations that we have to take into account when we announce the levels on November 1st. So you'll sort of have to wait till November 1st, but glad to continue.
I look forward to it. No, I appreciate it. I just very quickly, if I could get you on asylum seekers and the argument being made by Danielle Smith, Premiers Danielle Smith, Blaine Higgs, Tim Houston, and now Scott Moe. Just to get you on the record, are you moving asylum seekers from Ontario and Quebec to those provinces?
Not without anyone's consent. And I think what they've done is, and I sort of joked about it in French today, is...
Okay, gang, we're going to cross over to question period right now. Should be... close to getting started. Just give me one moment. Here we go.
Their missing loved one. May they find strength and support in the days to come. Thank you.
Here we go.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. I would like to highlight the absolutely exceptional work of Carol Binet, who has been working as a shoemaker in Trois-Rivières since 1957. Mr. Binet is still working. He's 83 years old, and he demonstrates a remarkable mastery of his trade. Carol's passion for shoemaking dates back to his school days. Over time, his workshop has become a true institution, serving customers from all over the Mauricie region. He's also developed a sewing and upholstery department, as well as a shoe shop. The people of Trois-Rivières know that they are very fortunate to have Mr. Binet, who is truly very skilled and has great people skills, so every visit to his shop is a precious and unique experience for the people of the riding. And I asked him, why don't you retire? And he said, well, if I were to retire, there wouldn't be any shoemakers left. He is so very dedicated. It's an honor to commend him on his incredible career. He is a true example of resilience and perseverance. Thank you for being there for the people of Trois-Rivières.
The Honourable Member from Portage-Lisgar.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Now the Bloc have officially decided to join the coalition so they too can cause a little bit of hardship for Canadians. They clearly support skyrocketing rents and crime and chaos in our communities and weakened wages. Just the other day, the Premier of Quebec called on the Bloc to vote in favor of our non-confidence motion to end this tired government, and I agree with him. But the question is, why don't the Bloc? Do they not shop at the same stores as the rest of us where the carbon tax has driven up the price of everything? Can they not see the drug-fueled crime in our streets? Or maybe it's because they have the most MPs slated to benefit by getting a pension, just like the leader of the NDP. One thing is clear. The choice Canadians will have in the carbon tax election. The Liberal NDP Bloc coalition, who will continue to increase grocery prices, raise your rents, spend recklessly and allow crime to run rampant. Or common sense Conservatives who will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
The honourable member from Calgary Skyview.
Mr. Speaker, over 105,000 Albertans are now eligible for the Canadian Dental Care Plan, and 750,000 Canadians have already received care. The numbers speak for itself. Canadians want the CDCP. Accessing dental care shouldn't be political. This is a historic program, and we must protect and build our public healthcare system so that it's well equipped to meet the needs of Canadians today and for generations to come.
Colleagues, chers collègues.
Greg Fergus, eh? What are you going to do?
The last time I was in this chair, there were a number of questions which were not relevant to the administration of government. There were words which fall outside of what's acceptable in a parliamentary parliamentary system, and there was behaviour which was also outside of the parliamentary traditions. I'm hoping I will have more to say about this in the coming days, but I hope that members will conduct themselves in a manner that is befitting of our constituents who have sent us here to represent them. Alors, chers collègues, jeudi.
Dear colleagues, last Thursday there were questions that were not.
I thought, Patty, you were going to make me say it.
To government operations and administration. We heard certain statements that are unbecoming of Parliament, and we saw certain gestures in the same direction. And so that I hope that today we will be better. We will behave better in a dignified way and in respect of our constituents who have voted us in. I will have more to say on the matter in the days to come. The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
From Regina Capel. After 9 years of NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time's up. And Canadians are suffering. And the Liberals look around the country and they see tent cities popping up in our communities. They see millions lining up at food banks and families falling further and further into debt. And what do they think is the cause of all these problems? That Canadians aren't paying enough in taxes. That must be why they've already hiked the carbon tax 5 times and why they're going to hike it to 61 cents a litre. How can making everything more expensive provide any relief for Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am glad that the Conservatives are finally talking about the economy because it gives me a chance to highlight some good economic news we've had. Last week, we learned that inflation in August was at 2%. In fact, for all of this year, inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. That means interest rates are coming down. Meanwhile, wages have been outpacing inflation for 19 months in a row. But the Conservatives don't like to talk about that because good news for Canadians is bad news.
Yeah, exactly.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
She can tell all the people lining up at food banks that they've never had it so good, and she knows that prices are not coming down. She also knows that her carbon tax won't stop a single forest fire or flood. They've admitted that. So Canadians get the brutal double whammy of all the extra costs associated with natural disasters, plus the carbon tax on top of it. And now the NDP leader is trying to pull off another stunt. He's trying to fool Canadians that he's got some new position on the carbon tax. In reality, he loves it. He's voted for it 24 times. If they're so sure that Canadians love their carbon tax, why don't they take it to the Canadian people and let them decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, all these Conservatives know how to do is talk Canada down. And you know why that is? It's because they don't want Canadians to ask themselves what the Conservatives really stand for. That's because the Conservatives have a hidden agenda. They have a hidden austerity agenda. And it is time for us all to ask ourselves, what would they cut? Would they cut childcare? I think so. Would they cut dental care? I think so. Would they cut our housing plan? There she would.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
It's Canadians who are cutting back as they've seen their paychecks devalued and prices skyrocket. But it's not just the carbon tax that the NDP and Liberals are hiking. The new tax hike that the government is announcing today will hit the middle class hard. In the middle of a housing crisis, they're raising taxes on carpenters and roofers. In fact, the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations said this, quote, "The capital gains increase will discourage the construction of new rental homes for Canadians." Why is the government's response to the housing crisis punishing the people who actually build the homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am really glad to hear the Conservatives talk about housing because last week we made a very important announcement on housing. Last week we announced that amortizations for first-time home buyers and everyone buying new builds will be extended to 30 years. That is going to help young Canadians make the dream of home ownership a reality, and it will get more homes built faster. And I am shocked that the Conservatives are opposed to this essential measure.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, whom the Bloc wants to keep alive this week, the number of students in Quebec are ever more using food banks. The student federations have said it. Students find it hard to feed themselves. Over 80,000 went to food banks, 4 times more than 10 years ago. Instead of continuing to starve our students, will the Prime Minister and his Bloc Québécois lieutenant allow Quebecers to vote immediately to cut taxes for a common-sense government? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. This is absolute nonsense, Mr. Speaker. The member says how difficult people are finding it to feed their children, how there's too many children who go to school on an empty stomach. Last week, his Conservative leader said that such ideas are bureaucratic, including in his own riding. It's bureaucratic to give children food so that they can't go to school on an empty stomach. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. I invite the Liberals to look at the situation in its face. The Bloc should flee because housing and food costs have doubled in the last few years. We're paying $1 billion in interest on our debt every week, all because of the $500 billion of inflationary spending that the Bloc supported. Everyone has been paying for this. Does the Prime Minister, supported by Le Bloc Québécois, understand that enough is enough and that we can no longer afford his incompetence? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Let us talk about incompetence. Incompetence is stopping children from being able to eat in the morning and stopping MPs from supporting kids who have to go to school with an empty stomach. There are food banks in his riding. Will he go there to explain to them why it's bureaucratic to stop children from eating their fill in the morning? The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Liberals have a choice. They can correct an injustice to seniors by improving old age security for 65 to 74-year-olds. If they don't, well, they'll be solely responsible for causing an election. It's as simple as that. All retirees deserve support in the face of the rising cost of living, and this government is in no position to tell them they can't afford it. It has offered $83 billion in tax credits to oil companies, in addition to a lovely $34 billion pipeline. Now the Liberals have a choice: seniors or elections. The Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, this government has always chosen seniors. Unfortunately for our friends across the way, it's not always the case. Why have they voted against reducing the retirement age from 67 to 60, from 67 rather to 65? Why did they choose not to support the most needy Quebec seniors? At every turn, the Bloc Québécois voted against. What about dental care? The Bloc Québécois voted against dental care, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Just a reminder, oil companies received $83 billion in tax credits, and there was a bonus $34 billion pipeline. Meanwhile, pensioners aged 65 to 74 are being deprived of 10% of their pensions. That's a lot of generosity towards multi-billion-dollar oil companies out west, only to then tell Quebec seniors, well, I'm sorry, you're too expensive. Clearly, the oil companies are a Liberal priority. Our priority is seniors. It is high time the Liberals put their priorities in the right place. Are they going to improve pensions for all seniors or trigger an election? The Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors. I would like to invite my colleague, and I know that he wants to be specific in his words. We have never cut aid to seniors. Everything we've done, despite their opposition, all we have done is increase support for Quebec seniors and Canadian seniors. The Bloc has systematically voted against. I'd like to ask my colleague to correct himself in his statements. We've never cut in senior budgets.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
$100 for a doctor's appointment. For-profit corporations like Loblaws are forced...
Colleagues, it's important for the person who has the floor to take the floor so that the Speaker can hear the question and making sure that they get a clear answer. The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
$100 for a doctor's appointment. For-profit corporations like Loblaws are forcing patients to pay to see a doctor. Now, the Conservatives love this because their chief strategist, Jenny Byrne, also doubles as a chief lobbyist for Loblaws. The Liberals promised a crackdown. That turned out to be a letdown. Why does the Liberal government continue to let big corporations rip off Canadians and stop defending and not defend our healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NDP had a choice. Continue working on pharmacare, continue working on dental, continue working to improve our health system, or to cave to a bully. And here's the facts, Mr. Speaker. If the NDP can't stand up to the Conservative leader, then how are they going to stand up for Canadians? The reality is we're going to keep fighting to improve our healthcare system and work on the basis of collaboration. We're not going to cave to the bullying of the Conservatives across the way, and we're going to make sure that every Canadian gets dental care, pharmacare, and yes, to make sure that we revolutionize primary care.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Again and again to big corporations that are ripping off Canadians, and they've not stood up to the Conservatives. Au Quebec.
In Quebec, the CSN says no profit on illness and sickness. We know that the Conservatives want to see CEOs enrich themselves upon the backs of the sick. But it's very disappointing to see this from the Liberals. They promised to stop the privatisation of healthcare. They have failed. Is it because they're too weak to stand up to the Conservatives or too beholden to CEOs? The Honourable Minister for Health.
Week is, Mr. Speaker. Week is 2 days after the Conservative leader demands you stop action to work with the government to help Canadians on health care, to run away. You know what else is weak? To abandon climate action when the Conservative leader puts too much pressure on you. And I think Canadians should ask if the NDP is willing to stand up for them if they can't stand up to the Conservative leader. I will say to you that we are here each and every day to make sure that Canadians get what they need, to stand up for our public health care system, and to make sure the Conservatives don't get what they want, which is to cut to the bone our health system.
The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time is up. Here's how bad the carbon tax has driven up inflation in food costs in Toronto. The Daily Bread Food Bank says their monthly usage has gone from 60,000 to 350,000 people per month. That's a 480% increase. Pre-COVID, they spent $1.5 million per year on food. Today, $29 million. Their only solution is to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Instead, why don't we have a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide?
The honourable member for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity once again today to talk about what's up, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you what's up. Women's participation in the workforce is way up and has reached a record high. New childcare spots are being built, and that means 250,000 new spaces by 2026, Mr. Speaker. We know the Conservatives would like to cut these programs, but on this side of the House, we will fight for Canadians.
The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
The Liberals would make you think you've never had it so good, despite millions of Canadians having to line up at a food bank every month. And we just don't know how many more facts they need to see about how damaging the carbon tax really is. The trucking industry says it adds $4 billion a year. Farmers are going to pay $1 billion more in carbon taxes, and food banks in every part of this country are seeing skyrocketing use. And their own budget documents say it blows a hole of about $35 billion at least in the economy. Again, if they're so confident, call an election and let Canadians decide on the carbon tax for themselves.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Interest rates are down, inflation is down, gas prices are down, and pollution is down, Mr. Speaker. Pollution levels are at their lowest level in 25 years, Mr. Speaker. What we've achieved is the equivalent of removing from our roads 69 million cars less pollution for Canadians, for our kids, all across the country. We're fighting for climate change, we're fighting for Canadians, we're fighting for a better future for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, everyone knows taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and pretty soon time's going to be up for these corrupt Liberals. We all remember a couple of weeks ago where a brave steelworker confronted the Prime Minister and said taxes are killing him, and he doesn't believe a single word the Prime Minister has to say. And yet, the NDP keeps propping up this unpopular government. Why? Because their leader wants to keep his pension. Why is this NDP Liberal government so intent on raising the carbon tax and reducing workers' pay?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, for all the Canadians watching at home, they will know what's up, Mr. Speaker. It's investment in the future of this country, Mr. Speaker. Under this Liberal government, investment is up in decarbonization to make sure that our steel mill would be productive, to make sure that our steel workers would have a job, to make sure that Canada would win in the economy of the 21st century, Mr. Speaker. Canadians know that what's up is to make sure that this government continues, that we make sure that we invest in them, and we build the Canada of the 21st century.
The The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
That minister has some nerve to talk about steel. Let me tell you this. I met with steel workers and the steel industry, and they have said if they quadruple the carbon tax like they plan, there will not be a single steel plant left in this country. That's his economic record. That's what he's doing to Canadians. And the carbon tax is not an environmental plan. It's a tax plan that's blowing a $35 billion hole into the Canadian economy every year. Workers are bringing home less. They're paying more. It's time for a change. Why don't they call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to talk not only about steel but about aluminum, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Because one thing that Canadian workers know is that when it was time to stand up for them, we stood up for them, Mr. Speaker. We just imposed tariff on steel that is coming from China to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we would protect our industry, we would protect our job, we would protect our future. Mr. Speaker, workers across the nation know that we have their back, we will fight for the industry, and we will always fight for Canada, Mr. Speaker.
Very good.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have weakened the criminal code, and now crime is moving out of Montreal and is becoming tentacular everywhere in Quebec. Let's not forget, the Bloc voted for the Liberal government's bill allowing criminals to be arrested and released twice in the same day sometimes. Can the Liberal government and its Bloc friends tell us why they made such a mistake? The Honourable Minister for Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, with regards to release on bail, what we did is that we changed the rules with the support of all parties in this House. We also increased penalties for certain crimes like car theft, but with regards to the provisions, this is a decision made by justices in our country who are appointed by provincial governments. Appeals decisions are made by provincial Crown prosecutors. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister recognise that changes through C5, C75, C83, does he recognise that criminals are no longer scared of anything? Crime is exploding throughout Quebec. A 14-year-old died in Beauce. Shots have been fired in Quebec City and in the Saguenay. An increase in crime. Will the government recognise their mistakes and bring back the criminal code to what it was? The Honourable Minister for Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Just to be absolutely clear, when a decision is made, it is made by a provincially appointed justice. An appeals decision is also made by an attorney appointed by a province. When a decision is made to see if there's enough place in prison to welcome someone, that is a decision made by provincial governments like the government of Quebec. In 3 words, speak to Legault. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Immigration admitted on Saturday that his government waited too long before reducing immigration levels. He said that they took a little too long to slow things down. Mr. Speaker, Quebec has been sounding the alarm for years. The Bloc Québécois has been warning the minister for years. We presented him with facts, and in response, he responded with insults. Does he realise today that we would not be caught up in such a fiasco had he listened to Quebec's warnings instead of calling everyone all kinds of names? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I nearly heard a compliment in my regard from my colleague, perhaps thinly veiled, but from here on in, I expect the Bloc to support our measures that will allow us to reduce immigration by temporary immigration by 7.5%. I hope that we will have his personal collaboration, because last time he contacted my office was to increase the number of temporary workers. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. I think that he's mixing a few conversations that were private. To quote the minister again, it's always easy to look back and say, well, we should have done this or that. Mr. Speaker, what would have been easy is to listen when it was time to do so. I had somewhat of an issue hearing the question from the member for Lac-Saint-Jean, so I would ask him to start it again from the top. To quote the minister again, it's always easy to look back and say we should have done this or that. Mr. Speaker, what would have been easy is to listen when it was time. Quebec warned him. The Bloc Québécois warned him. The economists of major banks warned him. Even his own officials warned his government as early as 2022 that his immigration targets would put pressure on healthcare and housing. He listened to no one and insulted everyone. Now it's too late to listen, but it's perhaps not too late to act. What is he waiting for, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Mr. Speaker, so many compliments for me. I'm loving it. But I'd just like to remind the member across the way that it's the same Quebec government that tripled the number of temporary residences under their jurisdiction. We have the duty of readjusting. That is what we are doing, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, he just blamed his own government last week. It's all well and good if the minister admits that he took too long to act, but this admitted fault is not yet half forgiven, because at the moment there is no distribution of asylum seekers. A record number of asylum seekers are on social assistance because they're waiting months and months for their work permit from the federal government. They're not even allowed to work, Mr. Speaker. There's still years upon years upon years of delays in processing applications, and all the while, Quebec's public services are overworked. When are we going to see real action on the ground with real results, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. It just takes 60 days for a work permit, Mr. Speaker. I met the new Immigration Minister, Jean-François Roberge. I will be meeting him tomorrow with the Minister for Public Safety, and I expect we will make good progress.
The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, after 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, cost is up, crime is up, and time is up. Drug addiction and crime have been running rampant under this government. As a direct result of the failed drug policies, this legalization experiment, overdoses have become the leading cause of death for children in British Columbia. In fact, numerous First Nations in BC are under a state of emergency due to the drug crisis as they try to protect their children. When will the NDP Liberal coalition admit failure and bring home our loved ones drug-free?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, our hearts go out to every community that is impacted by the illegal toxic drug supply. And it's nice to hear the Conservatives actually acknowledge that there is a crisis, because when they were in power, they cut the drug treatment fund by more than 2/3, Mr. Speaker. They're not willing to invest. Actions speak louder than words. We need every level of government involved here to save lives. This side of the House, we've committed over $1 billion to date. We'll continue to do more. When are they going to get on board and work with us?
The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, the answer is clear to Canadians, and the NDP Liberal government failed hard drug experiment and save lives. Rather than stemming the tide of overdose deaths, this Prime Minister's radical experiment has flooded our communities with dangerous opioids. It's even worse in BC's First Nations communities, where people are dying at 6 times the national rate. When the NDP Liberal coalition and this failed agreement, when will they end it and end this failed policy and save lives?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we continue to work with every level of government to save lives each and every day. Rather than slogans on the back of a napkin, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we listen to experts, we listen to the communities, we listen to the science. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in the health of communities. On that side of the House, they don't believe in science, they don't believe in data, and they don't believe in saving the lives of Canadians.
The honourable member from King Vaughan.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up. Mr. Speaker, across this country we are seeing seniors line up to get their groceries from food banks, skipping medication and living in tents. Mary, a senior in Maple, showed me her heating bill. She received $44 worth of gas but paid $46 in carbon tax. The NDP leader is keeping the Prime Minister in power so he can secure his pension. Why won't the NDP Liberal government call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Minister for Labour and for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, I thought we had heard everything in this House, and then I heard the honourable member. That from the party that has stood up in this House and voted no to every single support that we have brought in for seniors in this country. And that after the Prime Minister for that party, Mr. Harper, went to Davos to the World Economic Forum where he took that opportunity to tell Canadian seniors back home the retirement age was going up to 67. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I find it just really strange that the Liberals are bringing up the WEF. Like, I have no idea what the tactic or strategy would be there is, but why would the Liberals bring up the WEF? It makes no sense. None.
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
Lebanese Canadians in my community and across Canada are frightened as the region experiences unprecedented explosions and airstrikes. They've been trying to rebuild Lebanon for years. They don't want a war. This escalation means civilians, including children, seniors, people living with disabilities, vulnerable people pay the price. My constituents are terrified for their friends and families who are caught in the middle. This government needs to be pushing for peace so all those in the region can be safe. Can this government tell us what exactly they're doing to de-escalate the situation and prevent a wider war?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada is following closely the situation between Israel and Lebanon, both because of the danger of escalation in the region, but also because the high number of Canadians in Lebanon. As we have said since October, Canadians should avoid all travel to Lebanon, and Canadians in Lebanon should book a commercial flight to leave the country. No country or nation stands to gain from any further escalation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Hamilton Centre.
This Liberal government is allowing the rampant wage theft of truck drivers. Drivers who bring essential goods to Canadians are being taken advantage of because neither Liberals nor the provincial Conservatives have the courage to crack down on shady bosses. Our hardworking truck drivers deserve a government that fights for them, one that ensures they get paid for their work. Mr. Speaker, when will this Liberal government finally enforce the Labour Code to protect vulnerable workers and stop the brazen wage theft?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and for Seniors.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, the NDP, had they stayed in on a cooperative basis with us, they would know that we have worked closely with both workers and businesses to find an effective and fair solution to this problem. In fact, earlier this year, we changed the Canada Labour Code to stop employers miscasting employees as independent contractors. And any employer, Mr. Speaker, who knowingly misclassifies an employee to avoid their obligations is breaking the Canada Labour Code and will face consequences.
Good job.
The honourable member from Scarborough Aitkencourt.
Mr. Speaker, 750,000 Canadians have already received care through the Canadian Dental Care Plan, and that number will keep rising.
Skank.
9,900 constituents in my riding of Scarborough Aging Court have enrolled in the program. Many seniors have been able to get dental care after years of not being able to afford to. Can the Minister of Health update this House on how the Canadian Dental Care Plan is helping Canadians access dental care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Good to see
Thank you,
flying,
Mr. Speaker,
Brian.
and I thank the member for her question and for her relentless advocacy for oral health. The member for Scarborough Asian Court has been such a passionate advocate for making sure that everybody in this country gets access to the oral health care that they need. And you hear that number, 750,000 people in less than 5 months. That's an incredible number. But in behind that number, folks, are real lives, real stories of people who can be proud of their smile, people who are getting oral cancer. I was talking to Dr. Redmond, 3 patients identified with oral cancer that was caught early. Imagine what that means. This is about the kind of country that we live in, making sure that everybody gets care.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis isn't getting any better. In Quebec, right now, 1,671 families don't have housing. That's more than in July. There are 13% fewer housing starts. According to the APCHQ, many young people are worried about being able to afford the rent. 61% of young people. Can the government understand that making the same mistakes is not going to build more housing in Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for my friend opposite, but he knows full well, where is the Conservative plan on housing, on people who are unhoused?
When it comes to getting people housed, when it comes to making sure there's more homes, what has this government done? Lifted GST off of the construction of apartments, taken people off the street, 87,000 people off the street with wraparound supports, Mr. Speaker. They go to encampments and make videos and use people as props. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to stand by.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for my friend opposite, especially dressed like we are today. But the question is that Canadians are suffering because of a shortage of housing. These folks have been in office for 9 years, and what they're doing isn't working. One thing's for sure on this side, our plan is not based on what the government opposite has done, all the while enthusiastically propped up by the Bloc. 28% of Canadians are thinking of leaving the country because of that. Have you thought about that? I'd just like to remind all members that questions are to be put to the chair in order to maintain a certain atmosphere in the House. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 housing units, affordable housing units. That's all the Conservative leader got built all across the country in the whole time his party was in office. And yet there are 160 affordable housing units that were built in the member opposite's riding in recent months. And so obviously it's the Conservative leader who's incompetent on this file.
What a creep.
The honourable member for Courtney-Lefort. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of the Environment announced he would delay the imposition of his order, which is harmful to our region, and the Bloc saw this as a gain and was satisfied. But this order will ultimately be implemented and will kill 1,400 forestry jobs in our region. It's just a matter of time. The Conservatives, we're the only ones who would cancel that order once and for all. Is the minister willing to say that not one job will be lost as a result of his order? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All the Conservatives have to offer is slogans and catchy phrases. But what we made was an offer of $468 billion to show that we're always open to negotiating a deal with the Quebec government. But the Conservatives from Quebec, obviously, as usual, have nothing to offer anyone. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Leflore. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of this job-killing order, splitting the difference in two is not a gain. Lives are still being ruined. Handing out millions of dollars that won't go to the economic development of our regions is not a gain. The only possible gain for those affected in the forestry sector is for this government to fall before Christmas. I can't put the question to the bloc, but what does the minister have to say about a minimum of, to the 1,400 forestry workers minimum who will lose their jobs for sure? The Honourable Minister of Climate Change and the Environment. Mr. Speaker, whether it's combating climate change, where the Conservatives have nothing to say, or on the issue of air quality, water quality, the Conservatives are basically the only ones who don't get it. Workers, unions, companies, the regions, the experts all know that there's no future in the forestry industry if we don't protect the forests adequately. No one but the Conservatives questions that. We are there to work with all stakeholders and the government of Quebec to find a solution. The Conservatives can just keep talking to themselves. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Let's talk about the Liberals' former Quebec lieutenant who was on Tout le monde en parle recently. When he announced he was stepping down to run for the PLQ leadership, he was asked about Amira El-Gawabi, whose resignation was called for unanimously by the National Assembly. Unanimously. He said he would have voted the same as everyone else in the National Assembly, but that's funny. He didn't say anything about her when he was minister. How many Quebec Liberals want her to leave but don't have the courage to say so? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've worked for a long time in diversity, in the university circles in Quebec. I know how hard universities are working to hire people on the basis of merit, but as we know, all across Canada and all throughout Quebec, diversity is one of the strengths of our university, and that's why we will always work with the government of Quebec and those who are fighting discrimination and fighting for inclusion so that all institutions, all individuals, all universities make the right choices under the right circumstances. It's rare to hear heckling coming from that corner of the House. I hope this isn't a trend that's emerging. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty incredible the kind of things coming from the new Quebec lieutenant, but I bet a lot of Quebec Liberals think like their former lieutenant for Quebec. But like him, before he stepped down, they're keeping quiet. They're not even embarrassed about stifling their opinions and putting aside their convictions when it suits their party and their personal ambitions for a cabinet job. If they truly share the values of Quebecers, then they should stand up, pound their fists on the table and say so. Why does Amira El-Gawabi still have a job? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quebec members on the government benches have a huge influence on the decisions that are made here. We are representative of Quebecers just as much as any Quebec member on the other side. The difference is that when we influence the government, we truly influence it. We don't just rip our shirts up publicly. We have an inside influence and we're making a real difference.
The Honourable Member from Calgary-Mindapore.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Canadians are struggling to meet their basic needs, and this government has decided the only solution is to tax Canadians more. This new capital gains tax will add a 30% tax increase on food producers at a time when the cost of food has already skyrocketed. The last thing Canadian families need is increased financial stress because of tax on our food supply chains. Why is this NDP Liberal coalition imposing this job-killing tax hike on Canadians?
Great question. Why?
Chris Murray, that's the funniest comment I've heard today about...
Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear
Chris
about
Murray,
the facts.
check out his comments.
In an average given year, only 40,000 individual Canadians have capital gains above $250,000 a year. That's 0.13% of our population. And we believe that it makes sense for those with the broadest shoulders to support everyone else. Conservatives can tie themselves in knots trying to justify policies that are ultimately about austerity and cuts. That's no.
The honourable member from Calgary-Mindeport.
Well, they certainly gave their uber-rich friends enough time to move their money and are about to give their best friend, carbon tax Carney, $10 billion. Not only will this new capital gains tax increase financial stress, but it will prevent families from transferring wealth to the next generation. The Canadian dream is to build a foundation that you can pass on to your children. The capital gains tax is now increasing the pressures on Canadians as they pass on their wealth, their businesses, and their farms. Why does this NDP Liberal coalition want to kill the Canadian dream?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, what I want to know is why the Conservatives are so hypocritical and inconsistent. There was a Conservative who said in 2020, and I quote, "The wealthiest 1% who own the most expensive and luxurious real estate and have in their portfolios the most stocks and bonds and other financial instruments will continue to see their net worth expand, having done nothing, by the way, to deserve that expanded net worth." Who said that? The current Conservative.
The honourable member from Calgary, Nose Hill.
So interesting that the finance minister brought up hypocrisy. Last week it was revealed that Liberal pseudo-minister Mark Carney's company, Brookfield, is lobbying the government for billions for a new corporate climate fund. But recently, a damning report revealed that Brookfield doesn't account for a whopping 92% of its greenhouse gas emissions that investments create. That's hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker. Can the Environment Minister confirm that he and his NDP Liberal partners won't help wealthy unregistered lobbyist Mark Carney get rich by giving billions in subsidies to his greenwashed company?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, our government is happy to get advice from Canadians across the country. But let's talk about who the Conservatives get their advice from. They get advice on the cost of living from a Loblaws lobbyist. They get advice on foreign policy and on Ukraine from Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson. And they get advice on women's rights from misogynists and the far right. We will take no lessons from them. That's right.
The honourable member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel. Mr. Speaker, more than 9,000 of my constituents in Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel are getting dental care thanks to the Canadian Dental Care Plan. This is a historic investment that benefits many Quebecers, especially seniors, and ensures access to the health care they need and deserve. Can the Minister of Public Services and Procurement explain how the Canadian Dental Care Plan helps Quebecers get the care they so desperately need? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. congratulations to the member for Saint-Léonard-Saint-Michel for the outstanding success of the Canadian Dental Care Plan in her riding. And that's true for the 750,000 Canadians who've had access to dental care in recent months. Unlike the member for Lévis-Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, she actually wins top prize. She's had 18,000 seniors in her riding seek out free dental care. No congratulations to the Conservative leader who still has nothing good to say about the Canadian Dental Care Plan.
Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for this high-flying, jet-setting Prime Minister who's off to New York to...
I'm sorry. The honourable member has a voice that carries, but I'm still having difficulty hearing his voice. If I could ask members, please. If I could ask all members, please, to have either quiet conversations or so that we can the chair can hear the answer. The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, 1009 Rideau Lakes, from the top, please.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for this jet-setting, high-flying Prime Minister who's off to New York City to dine with elites while doubling costs for Canadians. While he's there, maybe he could check out the $9 million condo that he got for his media buddy, Tom Clark. They could share a coffee from this $5,000 coffee machine or work on their golf swing at the golf simulator paid for by Canadians, and maybe the Prime Minister can save us a couple of bucks and bunk with his buddy, Tom Clark, at this $9 million condo on Billionaires Row.
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Canada undertakes very important work representing Canada at home and abroad. And for example, this week in New York, he has spoken at the
The Honourable Minister, I'll invite him to start from the top, please.
The Conservatives might have been more comfortable, Mr. Speaker, if I began with a bad poem. However, the Prime Minister undertakes very important work on behalf of Canada at home and abroad. And for example, this week in New York, Mr. Speaker, not only is he speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, but he's also leading and co-hosting the Summit of the Future, talking about key global challenges on sustainable development, international peace and security, technical innovation, digital coordination, decarbonization and clean energy, and human rights. Now, I do appreciate nobody over there appears to care about any of those things, but they are important to Canadians.
Right. The honourable member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and now time is up. Since 2015, violent crime has surged by 50%. Shockingly, sex assaults by 74%. Today, the parole board inexcusably granted day parole to a serial rapist who still poses a risk to drug, manipulate, and coerce victims. Let that sink in. This is not keeping Canadians safe. Who on that Liberal bench approves of this?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows very well that the parole board by law operates independently from the government. Our responsibility is to ensure that the appropriate men and women serve on the parole board, something we have done with great seriousness. They know that the most important criteria in terms of an independent decision made by this quasi-judicial tribunal is public safety. My colleague knows that very well, and he should be careful not to increase public cynicism in a way that doesn't serve public safety. He knows very well that's incorrect.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Mr.
Speaker, the United Nations is arguing that UNRWA employees who participated in the October 7th terrorist massacre are immune from legal action. This is a day which saw 7 Canadians murdered. Let me rephrase that. They're arguing that individuals who contributed to the rape, the murder, and the kidnapping are outside and above the law. So I have a simple question for this government. Do they support immunity for terrorists? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for International Development.
Speaker, Canada is committed to ensuring that our humanitarian assistance aligns with Canadian values and international standards of neutrality. We take any allegations of misconduct very seriously. Upon learning of allegations from UNRWA about some of its staff, Canada was the first country to take action and pause all additional funding pending thorough investigations by the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services and an independent review led by former French Minister Catherine Colonna. But it is very rich, Mr. Speaker, for that member to talk about anything to do with the UN, because she would face down her party that wants to quit the UN. A founding member is in Canada.
The Honourable Member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, it's become abundantly clear that the Conservatives would cut the Canadian dental care plan, taking away coverage from 2.4 million Canadians who've already enrolled in the program, with more signing up every day. That's more than 282,000 British Columbians. Will the Minister of Citizen Services please update the House on the work being done by the government?
The Honourable Minister for Citizen Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my friend from British Columbia is correct. 2.4 million Canadians currently have their membership card. Over 750,000 Canadians have care. And we are all hearing the good stories of the change that is making in individuals' life. It's making life more affordable. So while Canada is in a position to have the lowest deficit, the best economic forecasted growth, we're investing in making life more affordable with dental care, with child care, with pharmacare, by building more houses, by attacking climate change and making sure that we actually make measures to make Canada's lives better, and we'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Wow. The Honourable Member from Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, this summer the Fisheries Minister announced that she was closing both the Pachina and Carmana lighthouses. These lighthouses sit between the West Coast Trail, which sees thousands of hikers per year, and the Graveyard of the Pacific, a famously treacherous stretch of water. Automating these lighthouses simply won't suffice. This decision puts lives at risk and was made without consulting First Nations, Labour, Mariners, or local communities. Will the Liberals pause this plan, do the proper consultation, and invest in keeping coastal people safe?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Coast Guard.
Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite for the question. We're aware of the cultural and historical significance of the lighthouses along the West Coast Trail. After an engineering investigation and assessment this year, the Canadian Coast Guard determined the locations were no longer suitable for the Canadian Coast Guard personnel to operate them safely.
This is my MP right here.
The safety and well-being of the Canadian Coast Guard personnel is our top priority, and we'll continue to ensure that the aids to navigation of these areas remain functional to continue to protect mariners and coastal communities.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago to the day, this government promised a new Canada disability benefit modeled after the Guaranteed Income Supplement. The GIS supports millions with maximum amounts of over $1,000 a month. The CDB, it's slated to deliver a maximum of just $200, and that's the select few who can qualify for the disability tax credit. Shame. Consultations on regulation for the benefit close today. Will this government listen to the disability community and deliver a Canada disability benefit aligned with their promise 4 years ago? Now!
The Honourable Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Youth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to making sure that we are delivering on the Canada Disability Benefit. Mr. Speaker, we are stepping up and making sure that more than 600,000 Canadians with disability will get the Canada Disability Benefit. Mr. Speaker, this is what happens when we all work together to deliver for Canadians, and we're absolutely committed to making sure we get it through the finish line. Thank you.
so comes to an end of question period. I understand that the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, is rising on a matter.
Well, they ended that right there. So, gang, what an incredible show, an amazing audience. Welcome to the new viewers. Always welcome back to the regular viewers. You guys are the best. We really have. I have hung out in some other chat rooms just to see what else is going on, and we do have the best chat room. We've got new members. We've got this guy, Rory Kennedy, that's amazing. Positivity, insight. There's so many other, and the regulars that come back. I'm very excited to see Patty Zato back. Anyhow, these Canadian politics are wild, guys. And what are we going to go out on? I'd like to show more Andrew Scheer videos, but we're probably just going to go out on this. It's been a fun show.
You should do exercises. That's important to our good health. And friends, tomorrow we are going to be visiting with a fisherman who will tell us about his very enjoyable hobby. Now, I would like to see you all through our magic mirror. Romper, bumper, stomper, boo, tell me, do. Magic mirror, please tell me today, did all of my friends have fun at play? I see all of my friends in Alberta. It's nice to see you. And I see Dan and Vivian. I see Marlon and Mona. I see Catherine and Harley. I see Anne and Elizabeth and Jane. I see Bert and Nicole, and I see you too. I hope to see you tomorrow, right here in Romper Room.
Ding dong, knock, knock, hey, daddy, do. Bing bong, tick tock, bebop, boom.
Kick off your weekend with exciting CFL action when the Edmonton Eskimos tackle the BC Lions in Vancouver. Tomorrow night at 10:30 on CFTO TV.
Ding dong, knock, knock, hey, daddy, do. Tip tap, pitter pat, granny cat too. Rooty toot, Kimble, loopy loo. Boppity stompity, romper room and friends.
All right, gang, thank you so much for tuning in. We're out for now. We'll be back with more videos later this evening. Obviously, we're going to do the question period tomorrow live, so come and check that out. And anybody that's interested in doing videos, in trying something out, send me an email. I'm available on here. You can find me if you're looking for me. And I am looking for people that want to do stuff like Kirk, Paul, and Sheila and I did last night. I've got a few people that are waiting to do this kind of stuff, but I need a bigger group. So we just want variety of opinion. That's all. Anyhow, I'm Aaron, Canadian Looney. Like, subscribe, share, get notified, all that fun stuff. It's a blast here all the time. I can't believe how great this chat room is. It's an amazing chat room. Great community. Anyhow, guys, we're wrapping up. We are out. That's it.